One last mic test. You have to listen to me? This is good. Okay, great. My name is Andrew Cerrito, and my thesis is called We're Still Here. And We're Still Here is the beginning of a series of normally unnoticed, ordinary, everyday objects that have evolved personalities and behaviors based on their original functions. I'd like to start out with a short clip of one of my very first projects created at ITP. It's called The Embarrassed Book, and you will see why. So at the time that I made that, I was mostly concerned with just making something entertaining and silly, but I really grew attached to the final result. The interaction was super simple, but imbued the object with personality. And through participating in the lighthearted struggle, users formed a novel relationship with the book and reconsidered its standard image as a passive container of knowledge. From this project, I learned that attributing personalities to objects is a playful and powerful way to reshape people's relationships with those objects. Now, some objects like laptops and smartphones don't really need much more help in forming a meaningful user relationship. These objects tend to be sleek, shiny, multifunctional, and expensive, but most importantly, they tend to reveal hints of personality from their design. The objects that successfully combine function with style and personality are the ones we engage with most and end up obsessing over. But I find it a lot more interesting to ditch high technology and focus on things that could use a little help in expressing their inner selves. Applications like Siri can utilize voice and on-screen graphics and still appropriately feel like a personality because they reside on devices suited for audiovisual media. With objects like these, though, their only method of communication is their physicality, and to add sounds, motion, or voices could make their personas less charming or believable. I think that the creative process gets more interesting with these constraints. And when I designed my own objects, I tried to stay true to the natural language of each object. My research process mostly revolved around analyzing artwork, dealing with the form and language of everyday objects. These are two pieces I found interesting, Duchamp's bicycle wheel and Klaus Oldenburg's clothespins. They're two very usual objects made intriguing through altering the context in which we normally see them and expanding their physical form respectively. I was intrigued by both of those works, and I even put the principle of altered context to work by visiting many junk shops and viewing everyday objects outside of their natural environments. This did end up helping me significantly with coming up with ideas. Ultimately, though, these pieces lack the dialogue with the viewer that's needed to form a sense of personality or connection. I continued to search and think about projects more in line with what I wanted to explore. And one that I really admire is Kelly Dobson's Blendy, which is a blender that you have to talk to in Blender language to get it to blend. Enticing the user into conversation with an object elevates the object from a subservient thing to more of a peer. And the blender is humanized while staying true to its natural language, and it's whimsical but believable because of that. Another piece I really liked was Douglas Repetto's Poles. And I found it interesting because it exploits the form of the cable to induce emotion. The awkward motion of the cable's stiff, long legs calls to mind a baby animal trying to take its first steps. And I find the motion to be very effective at creating endearment and evoking sympathy. And in a different, unfortunately, very low-quality clip, you can actually see some of these cables fall over, and they can't get back up, and it's actually really heartbreaking to watch. So this exploratory process generated a lot of ideas, some of which had to be culled because either the interaction was ultimately not believable enough or it didn't stay true to the object's original function. And you can see some concept sketches of a mailbox and some shoe trees that didn't quite make the final cut. Okay. So one of the two objects I'm presenting today is an alarm clock. I picked an alarm clock because it's not an object that people generally feel much kinship with. It's definitely a vital tool that keeps our lives on schedule, but its core function is to disrupt us, and so it tends to feel a little cold and uncaring at times. In response to that, I designed a clock that cares about you a little too much. It craves your attention, and when it feels like you're being too distant, it switches from a clock display to a countdown timer. If it's not reassured in time, it'll throw a fit, but if it's shown affection without having to beg for it, it gets happy. And here's a short clip of that clock in action.
Okay. I wish you wouldn't get so lonely when I'm asleep. Oh. Hang in there, baby.
So I based this behavior on the fact that the average alarm clock is designed to coerce the user into touching it at a regular time every day. This more emotional version of the clock has interpreted that regular touch as an act of love. Here's a picture of the clock's construction. The clock uses a 7-segment LED display, a piezo buzzer, capacitive sensing, and an Arduino Pro Micro. Sticking to the design elements of display, sound, and touch let me more or less preserve the clock's natural language. And since the large LED display is such a prominent aspect of the clock's design, I wanted to be able to present a multitude of positive and negative reactions in order to keep the interaction from getting stale. Each letter of each message had to be plotted into binary codes in order to send it to the clock's screen. The second object in my series is a coat rack. I found coat racks to be interesting because they're tools that are pretty ubiquitous, but we only interact with them when we're in transitory states and we have other things on our mind. Their physical form is also pretty interesting to me. They're very tall and very slight, and they have to maintain perfect posture all the time and hold these really heavy, awkward things for most of their existence. And it's a lot to ask from something that gets very little consideration or praise. So the version that I'm developing slouches when it thinks no one's looking at it. When it knows it's being watched, it snaps back to an upright position. It's fundamentally interested in being a dependable coat rack because it wants our approval, but it needs to take a break every now and then. With no background in engineering, figuring out the mechanism was a fun ride. I took inspiration from push puppet toys and incorporated a similar segmented corded design in my concept sketches. Here were some early prototypes I made at different scales to test the mechanism, and these were all puppeted by hand so that I could try to get a feel of how the motors would eventually have to move to get the motions that I wanted. And so the actual object is still very much a work in progress, but here's some short clips of the mechanism in action. So it's good to start with the one where it works. Here's a different one in which the leaning goes in a little bit of a different direction, and I hope to eventually develop this behavior into sort of a circular stretch routine to give more variation to the rack's actions and personality. And the current mechanical challenge I'm facing is that putting even the lightest load on the coat hooks significantly affects the rack's ability to stand up straight. And I hope to make some alterations to the design in order to lessen the load on the motors. Here's a more in-depth look at some elements of the coat rack's design. The rack has a solid bottom pipe and 6 segmented tops, all made from PVC piping. Each segment has concave and convex 3D printed caps inserted into it, through which run durable nylon cords and wiring for sensors. Here's a shot of what's happening inside the base. 3 high-torque servo motors keep the various cords taut or slack as needed to directionally control the lean. And the pipe also has an elastic spine running down its center to help it snap back into place. The rack also relies on 2 types of sensors to help inform its behavior. On the pole itself, there are 3 small photocells beneath each of the 3 hooks. When the coat is hung, it covers one of these sensors, which reports the change in light. This way, the rack knows which hooks are occupied and can slouch in the appropriate direction. There are also 2 infrared distance sensors mounted in a plastic cone at the base of the rack, which detect if people are close by, and let the rack know whether it can relax or should be standing at attention. They're purposely kind of weak because I purposely wanted the coat rack to be kind of blind, because I want users to be able to see the slouching behavior fairly easily and be able to control it intentionally if they want. The interaction would lose its fun if it was too hard to witness or trigger. Okay, here come some words. I learned a lot in the course of making these objects. One very important thing is to test your concepts as much as your mechanisms. In some of my earlier proposals, a lot of people were confused by the idea of the clock, because I had originally presented it more in line with the coat rack as something that people don't really think about too much. Talking with other people, though, made me realize that a lot of people do feel a relationship with their alarm, even if it's overwhelmingly negative. So being able to share my concept and getting feedback helped me refine how I presented it later. Yeah, and there's a reason mechanical engineering is hard. Just in general, if you're exploring a new field, prepare to progress very slowly and mess up very badly. And if you allot time for that and reflect on it, you can learn a ton. And lastly, my own thesis worked on myself, because alarm clocks and coat racks are totally bizarre and fascinating to me now. It's pretty liberating to think that nearly anything could become interesting if I just think about it hard enough. My goals for the future are to improve both the objects I have and create new ones in an effort to make it a proper series. Eventually, I want to have around 5 of these objects and present them as an interactive exhibit. Once the series is developed, I'd also like to reshoot some documentation that shows a user interacting with them as they go about their household routine, because I think that situating the objects back into their normal context and environment would make them stand out even more. And in true ITP fashion, it takes a village to raise a thesis. I couldn't have done it without my brother Chris, my parents June and Bob, my grandparents O'Neill and Doris, faculty members Catherine, Danny, Eric Rosenthal, and Ben Light, and approximately 10,000 of my very talented and very generous classmates. I would also, as a final special thank you, like to thank the person who put the coat rack in the men's bathroom, which I stumbled upon at 3 a.m. one night and caused me to think I was going insane. So thank you to whoever did that.